Hey friend, welcome back to the Becoming Home podcast, a project of fullyabundantlife.com. This month we are talking about Pride Month. We're super excited for this month because we're really unpacking some old toxic stuff and getting rid of old things that we used to have, like old fears and old ideas about homosexuality and the Bible and religion. And so we're really excited to be unpacking those things and coming into new love for ourselves, for other people, new understanding of God and spirituality and relationship. We're super excited. Stick with us. Let's get into week 2 with Christy Marsh. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to our home, my home. Thanks for being in my home. Thanks, Christy, for coming into my home.
Honor to be here.
Yay. So this is the Becoming Home podcast, and we are trying to love ourselves and each other better today than yesterday, and just become home and make space for each other. So this month we are recognizing Pride Month. I was really excited to have this conversation with Christy. Christy and I know each other from, it's a group called Rethinking God with Tacos, which is really funny. And it was actually the funny name that got me to investigate further. My first reaction was like, that's weird, swipe. And then I went like 3 seconds later, I'm not kidding, wait, that was weird. And I went back, and then it was like my tribe. It was so great. And so Christy and I are both, that's how we met. She's also in that group. And it's just a place where people are kind of hanging out and loving God better today than yesterday, getting to know God better today than yesterday, and thinking better thoughts about God than we used to. And so in that partnership, Christy had posted about being an ally or something like that, something to do with the LGBTQIA community. And so when Joellen and I decided to recognize Pride Month, that was like my first thought was, ooh, Christy posted a link to a resource. Christy is a wealth of resources. You're going to find that in this conversation. And then also we're going to create a PDF or some kind of, maybe check description notes. I'm not sure yet how that will play out, but somehow we will make sure that gets to you a wealth of resources to kind of go along with the conversation today. So yeah, I'm really excited to have the conversation. I looked up the resource that she had posted and learned a ton. So I feel like Christy's just a really great place to have a conversation. Christy's not a great place, great person. Like, I'm thinking of this place that we're creating in conversation, this space that we are wanting to hold and create to just kind of step into this idea of like, you know, what does it mean for me as a Christian? Like, you guys, I gotta be honest, like, I'm stepping more and more away from that term. I don't, good or bad, I don't know. I'm just, as a Christ follower, I think I feel better with that term.
That's what I do.
Even though it means the same thing. Like,
no, I call myself that too. I get
really?
it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just an association with religion is like, it's tough.
Yes.
Religion didn't save me. Christ saved me.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not alone in that moment. But yeah,
not at all.
As a Christ follower, where, you know, we have so much, I know Joe and I have had this conversation, and Christy a little bit, just as a kind of religious Christian, historically, there's been a lot of negative messaging about the LGBTQIA community and, you know, a lot of stuff surrounding that. And so as a place right now, right here with these 3 people, our intention is to find spaces where we can love more, serve more, include more, all the things, all the things in that direction. So I want to introduce you to Christy, and Christy's going to share a little bit about kind of your your journey historically, kind of what your background is with the religious side of things before we kind of move into like how we made that switch and that move. But if you could just for a minute, Christy,
Yeah.
talk about the ugly parts, I guess, really, like, because honestly,
Yeah.
like, we're here to be vulnerable, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's the way we grow. I think
Yeah.
vulnerability is a superpower,
Mm-hmm.
happens to be one of my biggest superpowers. I don't care who knows anything about whatever about my life. So, and I feel like you're the same spirit. You're like, we're all
Yeah.
spirit animals together here in this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Christy, yeah, if you would just kind of introduce yourself and sort
Okay.
of what your kind of messy past with all
Sure.
of that has been.
It really is an honor to be here and to have this conversation and to be authentic and open with y'all. It's open authenticity that helped bring me to where I am and helped bring the growth that I have in my life. So I'm here for it.
Yep.
I was raised with a very, very conservative biblical, we called it a biblical worldview. Holiness was very emphasized. Often that translated into black and white standards of living to be more Christ-like and very zealous in that. But that could also lead to a lot of moralism in that as well, and legalism. And so the environment and the system that I was raised in was very heavy on law, light on grace, and heavy in Bible too, through the hermeneutic that we had in that system. And from the time I was 7 years old, I had a Strong's Concordance in my hand and I knew how to use it, and was being introduced to studying the Greek language. I had the Greek alphabet memorized. I mean, we were studiers, we were doers, we wanted to live. Just very zealous to live that, to live holy lives that would give the world a better image of what a Christ follower was going to look like. And we had 10 hoops and 7 principles and 5 steps and 4 laws, and everything was very black and white. And in that space, we were very critical of other Christians who we felt should know better, who didn't hold the same standards we did.
Yeah.
So 20-year-old me would be very critical of 45-year-old me for sure. I would be very othering myself. I would see myself now as far too generous in my hyper grace or my love lens for folks. But in that environment, I developed a lot of perfectionism and performance skills. A
Yeah.
lot, very, very deep layers of that. But that was to look, to live, to work, to act perfectly with the thought that that was going to avoid or minimize pain in my life.
Yeah.
Perfectionism and performance only lasts so long. And there's always shame underneath. There's always layers of shame. So as I was entering in my younger adult years, I found myself very beaten down. And that translated into spiritually. And I was in an abusive environment, both spiritually abusive and other. And I ended up finding my way out of a cult. So I've had to rethink a lot of things when your foundation that you've built so much of your life on, you come to the realization that it's a cult. First, to even be able to admit that was very hard,
Yeah.
very hard.
I get that.
And then to be able to start to unpack that and separate toxic beliefs from harm caused by people and doctrinal beliefs. And so, but you know what? I'm so glad that, like, when I look at the scripture, I see how many questions Jesus asked. He
Mhm.
asked a lot of questions and he didn't give a lot of answers. So I think there's an invitation to ask a lot of questions, an invitation to be able to rethink. So I found comfort in that as I started to do that rethinking. And I have found just this beautiful dance relationship with God and in the Trinity in a very, very loving and safe space. And that has just been so very healing. I believe that our behaviors are connected to our beliefs about God and our behaviors and the way we treat people. And I think that's kind of that's what leads into my journey in this conversation around the queer community and LGBTQ folks. But at the same time, as I was entering into new understanding of God and better definition of who he was, and I also found myself still judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
I had just changed where the judgment was aimed at.
Mm.
So there was still this spectrum of othering people.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was able to grow in my relationship with love, I started to change. I started to do my work, heal my trauma, work on healing the layers of shame, to learn to love myself so that I could love others. But to be careful to not be on that spectrum of the judging, but to step off, because Jesus transcends that spectrum. He really does.
Yeah.
But I've found that sometimes in trying to seek Jesus and be off of the spectrum, sometimes I might sound really conservative one day, and I might sound really liberal another day to folks. This conversation, people would say, "Gosh, Christy sounds super liberal," and I by a lot of standards, definitely by how I was raised and came from, I would have said she's very liberal. But really, I hope that as you hear me share, you'll hear that it's really been a heart to seek after love himself and that growing in me, and to just step off of the spectrum. And it's easy to step onto it, but to catch myself and just hear divine love's call to say, you're nudging onto the spectrum again, and to take that step off. But in that, when I have the conversations like this, it's easy to approach this space talking about an ideology,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not really love in that.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually talking about people and lives and relationships.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nuance. There's nuance to my story. There's nuance to the people whose lives we're even talking about.
Yeah.
And there's a long journey. And I think if we can be curious and hold that nuance, it's easier to hear the stories and realize that we're coming with a lot of different lenses here, but we're talking about people, we're talking about relationships, and holding space to recognize that we're all coming with that journey.
Yeah.
And we all, regardless of where we are in that journey, I don't think any of us are born idiots, that we all have a reason for where we are in our journey and our why.
Yeah.
And I know you and I both struggle with the word Christian, but as Christ followers, we all desire to be faithful to Christ in our walk. And so if we can recognize that in each other, that there's that story, that journey, and make an assumption that there's an equal desire to faithfulness in that story and in that relationship, in that context, I think that gives us even greater space to hear the story, to be curious, and to just listen and discuss the journey. So that's kind of
And I'm glad
background.
you framed it that way, because I really did want to kind of pause and make sure that we honor our past. You know, like that we honor the places, all the places we've been in our journey. I know I used the term ugly earlier, or like, you know, but I've been rediscovering or rethinking the term ugly, even like darkness, ugliness. We just came out of April and May, where we talked about kind of, you know, these dark times in our lives, and being able to step in and find light and love and beauty, even in quote darkness. Absolutely. And so like, even in all of us, as we have come from a place that was less loving, there's still like, I still want to honor that part of our journey, because I feel like, you know, every one of us does the best we can with what we have at the time we have it, right? And so absolutely, as children, we're given what previous generations gave all down the line, right? And so you were mentioning like 7 years old, I'm in the Strong's Concordance, you know, what do you know at 7 whether or not that's the right choice? You know what I mean? That's what's being given to you. And so that's the framework. And I know there was a podcast episode I talked about before, or maybe it was in the free, I think it was in the free guide. I think I took that out. Okay, anyways.
There's a podcast.
There's information somewhere that you said before where like age 0 to 7, it's this framework that's built for us. It's not chosen by us. It's built for us externally to the internal. And the rest of our life is sort of this journey of deciding good, bad, keep, toss, like, and sort of the journey of the evolution of that. And so whoever's coming to this conversation with a particular framework, if that is your framework of Strong's Concordance, King James, hardcore, whatever, like if that's your framework, you're welcome here. I don't ever want to dishonor the places that we've been, and I don't think that you did. I'm just saying, like, I want to like specifically call it out, like you're welcome here. And whatever predisposition you're holding, you're coming to this conversation with. I don't want anything we say to like push you out the door or whatever. Like you said, I really want everyone to feel welcome. Come sit at the table with us, have a drink, Kool-Aid or whiskey. I don't care. Like, I don't judge. Hey there, forgive the interruption. I do just want to mention that this month we do get into some pretty serious things where people are sharing in their stories about abuse and some topics that could be triggering to some folks. So if you have some triggers around, types of abuse that you have suffered, or even suicide, things like that, we have resources to help. But I do want to give you a heads up that those are some of the issues in this month's conversations. And the great thing I'm excited about is that they are sharing about hope and resources and help. So if you want to stick around for that, please do. Just be aware it's in the conversations this month. Also, if you have a chance to support the podcast in any way, if it has helped you, served you, encouraged you in any way, you can head over to buymeacoffee.com/the Becoming Home podcast. We'll have a link in the description or the show notes, and you can buy us a coffee or join the $5 membership, whatever your flavor. You can support us there. But thanks for considering that. Now let's get back to the conversation.
We're only like barely 20 minutes in, and my brain is already like I'm already, my life is already changing as we're talking, just because the life that you talk about, Christy, is the life that I lived, and I'm only 3 years free of that. Like, I'm barely there, and I find myself every day having conversations with people in my mind of like, well, this is what I think. Okay, now I don't know. Well, what about this? What about like just the constant questioning is like, it's so frightening. And especially like for me, I have a sister right now who's like looking into the LGBTQIA community, and is like, that looks interesting. Like she was kind of standing at a window looking in, and I think now she's at the door knocking. Like, ooh, this could be a place where I belong. And as soon as it started happening, I was like, oh crap, this is a part
Deer
of
in the headlights. Like,
yeah, I was like,
with that.
this is a part of my like growing up years that like I knew what I believed, and I kind of forgot because I just didn't deal with it. I kind of forgot that like that's a thing that I have to process now. So as it's happening, like it's in real time happening to me.
Yeah.
And as we decided to talk about Pride Month, I was like, all right, buckle up, Buttercup. We got to get ready. Like, one way or another, you have to create space. And she's my best friend. So like, I can't just be like, well, I just disagree with it. Like, doesn't matter.
Right. Right. I think, I hear you with that. I think that, it's when the rubber meets the road, when we know somebody, when it's either our own journey into that with somebody, or often a catalyst because of somebody close to us. So it could be somebody who's discovering their sexual orientation, or they're close to somebody who is, and that usually sparks this rethinking journey. And you're right, we come with a set of lenses that's been passed on to us, and sometimes the resistance is just that that inner critic from the neural pathways, right?
Oh my gosh,
And they're just breaking down and they're complaining because they're breaking down because you're thinking something new. It's not necessarily even that it's wrong, but sometimes it's helpful to call that out, because whenever we begin to rethink something, there's a lot of that conversation going on with ourselves in our brain just because of the science of neural pathways even.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily even wrong. And we have a good shepherd who is so faithful to guide us into truth and loving truth at that. So when that critic creeps up, sometimes it's just easy to just lean into love a bit more. Helps a lot, but to recognize that inner critic. But I understand. I don't think anybody has studied this topic more or sought God more or sought the scriptures more than somebody who is rethinking this because of a relationship. So I think it's beautiful that you're at that space, and that gracialism that I was talking about, and that this spectrum of othering each other as I come into some of these conversations now, being an ally, it's easy for me to become judgmental of those who aren't accepting. But I remember when I was judgmental of those who were. So it's helpful for me to remember my journey too. And I've never wanted to be where I'm just so in that fight mode, if you will, or in a conflict mode. That's why I see that so much of the relationship and the nuance and the curiosity keeps us open to the people's stories, regardless of, like you were talking about, Charlene, regardless of where we're coming into this space, just the desired faithfulness and the nuance of people's lives and relationship, and also with ourselves too, and our own inner critic and neural pathways or siblings and such. It's so multifaceted for sure.
Yeah, and I love the question personally. I do this question personally when I feel the inner critic. I don't use the term inner critic, but it's the same thing. Like when it's my religious persona, or like my religious kind of protector. I use the term protectors from like internal family systems.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. So one of my protectors is a religious protector, like hold on to the religious beliefs, And so one of my questions I like to default to is like, tell me what you're afraid of. Because it's always in my mind coming down to fear. There's a fear of something. So like let's talk about that. Inner being, like inner self, afraid self, or like adamant self. What is that? Like what's the need to, what are we adamant about? What are we, let's unpack that. How do you feel about that? What do you think about that? So I love that you brought in neural pathways. I feel like it's something we've talked about lots and lots on the podcast, and so it fits really, really well with kind of where we've come from and things we've explored. And so I would love to also, before we go on, you've used the term once or twice that I want to kind of define for people who may not be as familiar with it. The phrase was we've othered ourselves or something. So just can you talk a little bit about what that means to you and like how you see that?
Absolutely. It's always the other person, the other side of the coin, if you will, the other side of the thought process. We other people so much. They're not like us. They are the other. And we do that very well without even thinking about it. There's so many scriptures that we could pull up that talk about the other person, or the one another's. Sometimes some people have preached whole sermons on that, I remember, but it is so easy to just get in. So easy to get into this space of othering and seeing folks as an other, right, rather than this beautiful people on a journey, and individuals and the relationship. And I just see all kinds of othering, regardless of what stance that is on that spectrum, that can have a divide that tends to happen in the ideologies much more, right? And just not quite the Jesus way, because love is just so much bigger. And that's been part of the journey for me, so much of that, because when I stepped into this, I used to think that I didn't see how I could be faithful to and be able to include. I thought there was a choice, perhaps, And maybe not
choose one or the
right, right. Instead of the ability, to I found that I could remain faithful to the God who I came to know in love, who captured my heart. I found that I could be faithful to him and include more people in that space and more of the others in that, and that it didn't have to be exclusive. But that as that circle that has included everyone has grown, God has become bigger and more beautiful, and people have become more beautiful.
Yeah.
And my whole experience in life has been more beautiful, that Christ can hold it all in him and he is in me. So in me, everything can be held within that. So my circle, instead of getting smaller and having to choose, got to just include more, which is just so beautiful. And I think of the this passage, in him we live and move and have our being. All of us live and move and have our being in Christ. It's just been beautiful to see how huge that's gotten, in my personal path of healing and wholeness has taken me in this journey that has been toward including the LGBTQ folks and becoming an affirming ally. I mean, it has been a journey. A lot of folks.
Can I take you there for a minute? Can I interrupt? Because I want to like direct it. I want to make sure we kind of, in my own head too, kind of follow this storyline and not miss anything. Like, can you, because I interrupted you earlier, and I want to get back to sort of like, how did you kind of start to make that transition out of, that past of othering into inclusivity? Like, what were some of the catalyst moments that sort of launched you that direction?
Yeah, let's go there. Right as I'm getting ready to go there, I just want to say that regardless of where we're coming into this space, which lens we're coming, and where in this rethinking, or even being willing to rethink, maybe for some folks, that the relationships and the journey is not formulaic. And so my story isn't going to look like anybody else's story. It's a separate journey. But wherever we're at, if we can just, the invitation is to, instead of going with the wisdom authority who maybe gave us the stance that we're coming into this space with, if we can just bring that to the light with the wisest counselor of all.
Yeah.
That would be my invitation as I'm sharing, to just sit with that, with the light, with Trinity, and with love, in and just see what they are speaking to your heart as I get to share some of my story. So I'm going to go back to 21 years ago when I met my mother-in-law for the first time. My mother-in-law was an OBGYN nurse. She had been a OB nurse for decades. And she was right up until close to when she passed away a few years ago. It's important to note that she raised my husband in a very similar system to myself. So yeah, you'll understand why that's important here. But I learned from her that biological sex isn't quite so clear as I had once thought it was, medically speaking. And you don't hear this talked about a lot unless you go looking for it or you encounter it personally. And I've experienced both, but it's a very personal conversation for folks because of society norms. Sometimes there's some shame in this conversation. So a lot of people might say, I've never heard this. Well, this is some of the why you've never heard that. Okay.
Yeah.
But quite often when a baby's born, what's the first thing that's happening in that room? Everybody's looking at the genitals and want to know whether it's a boy or a girl, right? But what happens when that's not quite so clear, when it's not quite so obvious? So there's a term for these humans. They're called intersexed people. And I did not know that this existed for until 21 years ago. There's actually 5 areas of maleness and femaleness, and on a spectrum, actually, which is really crazy. Most children are born with that appear clearly externally either male or female, but they don't all. And the areas might be one, the DNA, the chromosomes, on a spectrum. Ovaries or testes, a womb or not, what hormones the body's producing for male or female, and then how the external genitals develop. So when the sex is not so obvious with a child that's born, and they do tests, the tests do not come back either or, but they're on a spectrum in these 5 areas. So for example, and I have a little picture. Let's see if you can see. There's some idea of how there's 5 spectrums and how they can vary between. You might have a child who is born with XY chromosomes, with normal female external appearance, and in their hormone, the brains their hormones are producing would cause them to identify as a female. And or you might have somebody who's born with ovaries and XX chromosomes, and externally they would identify as a male. But a birth certificate requires a sex to be chosen, and there's only 2 choices. So this creates a predicament for a lot of families. And sometimes this intersex doesn't, there's an assumption made on gender based on external, but that doesn't mean somebody isn't still intersexed also. But sometimes that doesn't show up until puberty, or maybe when puberty isn't going as expected.
So let me clarify just for make sure I understand. So you're saying that external genitalia could look obvious, but all those other spectrums that are internal, like hormones and all the biochemistry, all those kinds of things, can be doing different things than what the external genitalia might be. Like, so they just chose boy or girl at birth, but there could be internally things that show up and not really show up or be clear until puberty, when of course it's our time of life.
Yeah. I have a friend who had a baby who was not 100% the gender that they thought. And one of the difficult things when this happens is that parents are often encouraged to put this child through some surgeries to help line up with a decision that mom and dad have made. And that can come with consequences. And that should be considered. There's quite a few consequences that can come with that, and the surgeries don't always go according to plan either. So it's something to
because don't all fetuses start out female?
Yes, and then based on the hormone surge and yes, and I am not a scientist, so I'm not going to try to get really deep into this. Actually, in the resources there'll be some stuff, but
that was a thing.
Yes, and
which may be helpful for some people, like, to just understand, like, okay, we all start at the starting line together. Right. And then it's several factors that conclude or like cooperate together, are supposed to work together in this perfectly harmonious way to create male female. Like that's what we've kind of been told in our materialistic scientific.
We've thought there's a supposed to and a formula, but it's not quite so clear.
That with technology, we've learned more.
That the prevalence of this is some people may think you just don't know anybody who's dealt with this.
So
but it's as common as redheads. The prevalence of an intersex child being born is as common as a redhead being born in the world, which is about 1 to 2% of the population. So if you just think about how many redheads you've met in your life, I'm related to some, not just met some. So this knowledge 21 years ago just gave me space to be able to become curious, to have more grace for people's stories, and to just be willing to be more welcoming. It was not that all of a sudden I was an ally and everybody who's
when
in
you
that.
And I had this discussion, even like it even just helped me when we had this pre-discussion, it helped me even to just be a little more open-minded to the fact that science isn't conclusive, because I feel like a lot of people I've encountered who are like hardcore on the religious side of things have said, well, science doesn't lie, and it's like, okay, maybe not, but science also evolves, right?
Right.
So it's an opportunity, an invitation for me to evolve alongside it.
Yeah.
We used to think that the world was flat.
Right. Okay.
Science,
And that,
science,
the earth was the center of all things.
right. Right. So science does teach us things. And this is not new science, lest you think this is new. This is not new. Mind you, I first started hearing of this 20 years ago, but my mother-in-law had been exposed to it long before. That's just when I encountered her.
Yeah.
In medical school, doctors, they get a couple of paragraphs on this in their medical textbooks. Okay. So they know it exists, but they don't pay much attention to it until they encounter it, either in their own family or in their patients. So it's not something they're really talking about. You're going to, you're starting to hear more of this. I've started to hear more of this, but
For sure.
it's just so eye-opening. And even just the potential consequences. I know there's it can become a hot topic nowadays for folks to talk about, children having surgeries and such. But these children that are born intersex, whose parents are making a decision to have a surgery for them that could affect their gender and their sexual orientation for the rest of their life. I'm not going to say where to go with that, but it just, again, it gives me a lot of space, a lot of invitation to just extend grace, extend compassion, and just that openness and the curiosity. That sexuality, gender identity, expression, orientation is so nuanced. I've grown.
Using that word nuanced. I feel like that's the perfect word for all of this, every bit of it, not just the LGBTQIA side, like the religious side too. Like it's so nuanced. I feel like even religious people are on their own spectrum, of like, the Bible says this as if the Bible were a modern scientific book,
Right.
Not. So there's there's a whole invitation to spectrum conversation, nuance conversation with that as well. So
yes,
I love that you're using that word.
Some time ago, just as the love lens was growing in me, somewhere that openness and empathy and grace and love extension, again, growing in me, my healing journey of my own harm and my own trauma grew love in me for others, but also this kind of knowledge also created space to love others more, and that curiosity. And somewhere along the line, I just, in realizing that I had come from this legalism, moralism space to learning more love and grace, but kind of becoming judgmental and almost being a gracialism, to just saying, no, I want to step off of that and I want to love other folks. In that transition, I started to find a desire to want to be intentional on finding others to love, not just who was in my space, but being intentional to go beyond that space, to be open to receiving the other. Because I didn't want to be on that spectrum anymore. So, but until I have a name and a face and a relationship to go with who I call the other, it's very easy to stay othering. So I wanted to be intentional. I wanted to learn to love people better, and God knew. And I knew some LGBTQ folks, but I didn't know them well, or the relationship had become distant. So it wasn't that I wasn't welcoming and I would have never judged any of them to their face ever, but internally in the conversation, and just a sense of maybe I'm maybe a bit better than, yeah, but that's where I was, being honest, to saying, okay, now I have this love growing in me and this desire to include more people, but now I need more relationship to go with this. So I took that to God. And about this same time, a friend of mine who I've known for a few decades now, she has 2 children in the queer community, and I've known them since they were children. I used to teach them. She started posting on Facebook some of these things anti-LGBTQ, and it was came across to me rather venomous, just hatred. And I knew her kids were seeing this, and it broke my heart. What she was writing just broke my heart. And I'm just seeing this and I'm thinking, how do her children feel? And the mother heart in me just wanted to extend love to them. I wanted to love on them. And I was so heartbroken for what they must be feeling. And just this separation and this divide happening in this family that I love them all.
Yeah.
But seeing this was so hard. And so I saw a door to be intentional with one of her kids that I had a little bit more connection with. And I wrote a letter to them. Now I said, I'm new to this. And I was so anxious to write the letter. I was afraid I was going to use the wrong language. I was going to botch it up, and I was being very vulnerable to do that. But I was very honest, and I said, I'm new to this space, but I see you and I love you. You've always had a special place in my heart. I want you to know that. I'm grieved at what I see happening on social media. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but I just want you to know I support you and I'm here. That was the first time I ever told somebody I support them in their LGBTQ space of identity. And I didn't expect a response. This person didn't owe me a response either.
Yeah.
But I felt that it was my invitation to be intentional after having put that out with Divine Love.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Becoming Home podcast. On behalf of Jo and myself, we want to thank you so much for investing your time here. Don't forget, you can head over to fullyabundantlife.com and grab more resources, grab a free guide on emotional processing tools. It's packed full of information over there. The guide has over 100 emotional words to help you identify exactly what you're feeling, more than just happy, mad, sad, grumpy, hungry, whatever. 100 words or more to help you really identify what's going on inside of you so that you can really process that better. Exercises to process. It's giving tons of information, somatic, where the emotion may be trapped in the body. There's loads of information in that guide, all for free. So fullyabundantlife.com, you'll see it right when you click on that website. And then if you need other information, I've got tons of stuff there for you to grab. So head on over there. Thank you again for being with us. We'll see you next time.